my name is Alan Jones, and I give you a very warm welcome to another life story coming to you from Life Stories Worldwide. We bring you stories from various countries, and these stories go out across the world, many parts of the world. We bring you stories of people going through all types of struggles in their life, challenges, dealing with pain, rejection, and so on, and how those lives have been transformed. We are live on Facebook, YouTube, and StreamYard. And you can also watch us on our website, Lifestoriesworldwide.com. Our story today is from Lancaster in the UK, and our speaker is John Mosey. John was born in Coventry during the time of the German blitz in 1940, and his secular training was in the aircraft industry as a technical illustrator. At the age of 22, he was the manager of the largest studio in this field in the UK outside of London. At the age of 24, he left to undertake 2 years of theological training at the AOG Bible College. And then something happened, especially at Christmas 1988, which he's going to share about, which affected his daughter. He's going to share about that during his story. It's great to have John with us, and we welcome you, John, to share your story with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan. It's so good to be with you and to feel free to talk about my life. There are a lot of things that have happened in my life, and well, they're pretty important things, some of them. As you've told part of my story, I was born while the Nazi bombs were raining down on the city of Coventry, and well, they missed me. So the houses around us were bombed, but they missed our house, and I survived. I remember the Blitz very, very well, and my father wasn't in the army. He was a steel hardening expert and was making parts for aero engines and tank engines, and so he was excused for the fighting, but he did 8 hours work at that, and then he volunteered for 8 hours as a fireman, pulling people out of blazing buildings and putting fires out, and then home for 8 hours. He did that for, I think, for 4 years during the part of the war that he was there. And I remember him taking me out. One of my very earliest memories, I don't know how old I was. I might have been 3. It was near the end of the war, taking me to the garden, in the back garden of our council house. And the sky was full. It was evening, and the sky was full of aircraft, bombers. And he said, Lancasters, Hastings, Wellingtons. He said, they're going to Hamburg tonight. And he was an aircraft spotter working for the government as well. And he knew some things about what was going on. My mum and dad were very ordinary, I suppose, very working class, low working class people, born in Sheffield, in Yorkshire. But they were kind, honest, very good and upright and thoughtful people. Mum used to leave the door open, unlocked at all times. Anybody who needed shelter could come in at any time. And I know after the war, we had German prisoners of war working on the field, bottom of our garden, building more council houses for the people who'd been bombed out. And the German prisoners of war were making the roads, digging the drains, putting in the sewage systems. And I know it was still rationing. We got very little fruit, tea and sugar and different things like that. But I remember my mum used to go down the garden and give a little packet of sugar or of tea to some of these prisoners so that they could have something to drink. They were that sort of people. Later on, I married a German girl. And I remember the first time I took her home, I wondered what they would say. But my dad, they loved her to bits. My dad spoke to her and pointed at me, and he said, "Surely you could do better than this." So I said, "Thanks, Dad, a ton." But they loved her very much, and that was great. I grew up in this fairly run-down, poor end of town. Our council house street had 121 houses in it. And I walked the full length of it every morning to school after the age of 5 and back home again every day, back and forward, back and forward. And I wonder if you could guess how many of those 121 houses had a car. Today, they've all got one and some have got two. But then, in 121 houses, 2 people had cars. 2 more had motorbikes. And that was it. Those were the days following the war. Well, I remember those days. I remember Dad taking me again in the garden one day and saying, and there was a screaming noise, and he said, "It's a Messerschmitt." And we had to quickly get into the air raid shelter. I grew up, went to school. Those were days when we didn't have computers and mobile phones. We spent our time, our recreation was climbing trees and building tree houses in the nearby woods, or paddling in the brook just up the road. It was a good time. I had a very good, pleasant and helpful teenage time. I remember that in 1947 we had snow, and across the road from us, the grass was still green with bits of snow on it, but it had all blown onto our side of the street, and it was a big pile of snow almost up to the bedroom window ledges. And I remember that time I was 7 and 8 years of age, and we were jumping out of the bedroom windows into this huge snowdrift. It was a wonderful time. Well, I went on and got into grammar school in Coventry, and then things began to change. Somebody from a church in the town decided to open a Sunday school in the nearby school where I had been as a younger lad. And they put out 50 chairs, put out leaflets to all the doors of the houses. And that Sunday, my dad said, John, why don't you go to this Sunday school? Well, he said, I'll give you a half a crown. Well, half a crown, that was, I think it was 12.5p. So I said, well, double it, Dad, and I'll go. So I was paid to go to Sunday school for 1 week. I went and I loved it. I thought it was wonderful. 50 chairs were put out, 50 kids turned up. So the people there had some faith, didn't they? And I remember going there and hearing the Bible stories and singing the choruses and songs that was there. It was a good time. And I continued going because I enjoyed it very much. And then my Sunday school teacher, Granny Green, we called her, an old retired lady. She said, would you like to come to church? And I started going on a Sunday night to the church, which was in the city centre. It was a church of about 300 people on a Sunday morning and about 200 in the evening. And I started going Sunday evenings to this church. One Sunday, she said, Granny Green, she said, well, would you like to come and have tea with us and then come to the Methodist Central Hall where there's a relay of a Billy Graham meeting that is happening in London? So I said, well, yes, I'd love to come, because I could see it involved a ride in their car. Now, I had not had many rides in cars. We didn't have a phone, we didn't have a television. Well, we'd got one by then just. We didn't have a phone. We didn't have a car or anything like that. I had a bike. So I went for tea and we went along to this service. I heard the gospel being preached. And that night, God spoke to me very clearly and said, get up out of your seat. Go to the front with all these other people who were giving their lives to Jesus Christ. I'd heard how God loved me and had sent his son to die for me that I might be forgiven. That night, my life was changed. It was radical, absolutely radical. And I just wanted to love him and to follow him and to serve him. Oh, we did some crazy things. We would go down the road and, from the church, and there was a pub down the road, and we'd go in through the door and throw in a handful of 2 or 3 dozen tracts into the room and shout, Jesus loves you. And it was crazy. Once we had a preacher came and he preached about from a verse in the Bible that Jesus said, greater things than these shall you also do. Well, one of the young people said, well, Jesus raised the dead. And he said, we'll do greater things. Hey, let's go and try it. So off we went. Four of us, I think it was, down to the London Road Cemetery. Well, it was locked, so we climbed over the big wrought iron gate into the cemetery. It was a huge cemetery. We found some graves there, and we went and we started praying over these graves to raise the dead. Well, of course, nothing happened. I can just imagine Jesus leaning over the parapet of heaven and saying, Peter, Gabriel, come here. Just have a look. Don't you just love them? Crazy, but don't you just love them? Well, we learned some lessons, but we loved God and we wanted to serve him and please him. I grew up, got older, started preaching. The pastor asked me to preach one Saturday night in the Saturday service. He would send me sometimes to smaller churches who didn't have a pastor and would ask me to go and be the preacher there. And I would do it. And they were good days. Then I met this girl. A girl from Germany came to our church, and she was doing her nurse's training preparatory to going to India as a missionary. She wanted to do her nurse's training and her midwifery training. And she came to our church. She was from a similar church in Germany. And somehow, after the end of 4 years she'd been there, I didn't notice much about her, but then suddenly someone turned the light on. And I realized that this was the girl who was the guy I wanted to share my life with. I prayed and fasted for 2 weeks. I just drank water for 2 weeks, didn't eat anything, and practiced what I was going to say to her. So I walked home with her to her nearby home near the church that Tuesday night after the prayer meeting. I stood at the gate and I said to her, and we'd never held hands or, nothing romantic before this. And I said, I've decided I'm going to marry you and I won't take no for an answer. She didn't say no. She said, I'm going to India as a missionary. I said, well, that's all right. I'm going to be leaving my job as a manager of this technical illustration studio. I'm going to go to Bible school shortly in a year, just under a year's time. So we had just a few weeks courtship, and then off she went to India as a missionary in the north of India, helping to run a home for children, about 100 children whose parents had leprosy. We corresponded by tape from a little tape recorder. and let her for 3.5 years. Eventually she came home. It was a hard time, those 3.5 years, but eventually she came back, and we got married, and we lived together in England. And I had left my job. I'd finished in Bible school, and off we went to our first church. We had a happy time. We had 2 children, Marcus and Helga. Helga was the oldest, and I think 3 or 4 years afterwards was Marcus. Helga was very musical. Marcus was a fine young man. Marcus is now the pastor of our church here in Lancaster, where we live. And that's a wonderful, blessed thing for us. We moved around the country. We preached in different places, different churches. God blessed our ministry as we went around and about. It was a good time. I'm so grateful to God for that time. There was a man came and lived next door, or we had a man living next door to us at one time, and he always argued that there's no God and the Bible's rubbish, and this Christianity thing it's just an imagination caused by anxiety about the future. He said it's all been made up. It's pretense. It's fiction. Well, I want to tell you that there's more to it than that. You see, there are proofs. The basic answer to his problem is that there is ample, excellent historical evidence for the existence of Jesus, a man who was known to do miraculous things. His life is recorded by both Christian and non-Christian historians of his day. And that's a marvelous and amazing thing. But I want to give some examples from the many experiences I have had of further present day evidences of the reality of God. God is real. And the reality of this new life that he is offering to all who will believe the gospel. There are many verses, if not more, encouraging us, even commanding us to seek to be more aware of what God is trying to tell us.